Summary of the Aeneid by Virgil, the Aeneid, Book 1. Virgil begins with wars and a man I sing, and says that he will tell the story of Aeneas, who has fled from Troy and is fated to eventually reach Latium in Italy, where he will found the race that will one day build Rome. But Aeneas's journey is made difficult by the gods, and in particular by Juno, the queen of the gods. Virgil wonders why Juno hates Aeneas, who is famous for his piety. He asks the Muse, the goddess of the arts, to tell him about the source of her anger. Virgil gives some background about Carthage, Juno's favorite city, a rich and old Phoenician settlement, located in North Africa, modern-day Tunisia. Juno wants Carthage to one day rule the world, but she has heard that a race of men descended from Trojans are fated to destroy it. Juno fears the potential Trojan destruction of Carthage. In addition, Paris, a Trojan prince, was once asked to judge who was the most beautiful goddess, and chose Venus over Juno and Minerva. Finally, Juno remembers that her husband, Jupiter, once ran off with a Trojan shepherd named Ganymede. All of this has made Juno, though despise the Trojans, that she's made it impossible for many years for them to reach Latium. Now the Trojans are sailing near Sicily. Juno angrily recalls a time when Minerva burned Greek ships. Juno, proudful about her power, wonders why she shouldn't do the same. Juno goes to Aeolus, the wine god, who keeps the wines in his dungeon. She asks Aeolus to send wines to sink the Trojan ships, and in return promises him a beautiful nymph for a wife. Aeolus immediately agrees, since Juno is the most powerful goddess, and unleashes the east, west, and southwest winds against the Trojans. The winds blast the Trojan ships, and Aeneas prays to the gods. He then wishes that he could have died at Troy, killed by Achilles just as Hector was. Aeneas thinks that the Trojans who died defending Troy were many times more blessed than he is, who survived only to have no home. Meanwhile, his men ships 11 are mentioned crash in the shallows or begin to sink. The situation is desperate, but then Neptune, the god of the ocean, notices the storm and recognizes it as his sister Juno's work. He angrily commands the winds to return to Aeolus, and proclaims that he, Neptune, is the lord of the ocean. Neptune then calms the sea, just as a politician might calm an angry crowd, and the sun comes out. The exhausted Trojans land their remaining 7 ships at a cove in Libya, and Aeneas, a friend of Aeneas's, starts a fire. Aeneas hikes up a mountain to try to see if any other of his men's ships are out on the water. Instead, he spots a herd of deer. He shoots 7 of them. Returning with the deer to feed his men, Aeneas gives a stirring pep talk. He recalls their difficulties with Scylla and the Cyclops, but says that someday they'll enjoy looking back on these events. A joy it will be one day, perhaps, to remember even this, says Aeneas. He says that the fates have determined that they will manage to reach Italy, so they should cheer up. Though Aeneas privately worries and grieves, he fakes a positive attitude to support his men. They eat and miss their drowned friends. Jove and Venus watch the scene from the heavens. Venus asks Jove when there will be an end to Aeneas's suffering. Jove tells her not to worry, and foretells more of Aeneas's fate. Aeneas will reach Italy and found Lavinium, but he will have to battle the Italian locals first. Aeneas will then rule for 3 years, and after his death, his son Ascanius will rule for 30 years. After 300 years, Romulus and Remus, sons of a mortal priestess and Mars, will be born, and Romulus will found Rome, which will endure indefinitely. Even Juno will change her mind and love Rome. Eventually, Julius Caesar will bring peace. He will close the gates of war and bind discord with 100 knots. Jove then sends the god Mercury to make Dido, the queen of Carthage, and her people be friendly and hospitable to the Trojans. Aeneas and Aeneas go into the woods, where they come upon a virgin warrior, who is actually Venus in disguise. Venus tells them about Dido's past, how her greedy brother Pygmalion, king of Tyre, killed Dido's husband Sychaeus for his wealth. When she learned what had happened from the ghost of her dead husband, Dido led her friends to escape, and founded the city of Carthage, A woman leads them all. Aeneas then recounts his difficult journey and laments his drowned men, but Venus stops him and tells him the lost ships have arrived safely at the harbor of Carthage. Venus reveals herself, and then makes Aeneas and Achates invisible by covering them in a dense mist so that they can travel safely into Carthage. As he walks through Carthage, Aeneas envies the productive and happy town with its workers building up the city like busy bees. On the walls of a temple to Juno, Aeneas sees a depiction of the Trojan War of a large temple of Juno including images of Priam Achilles and Hector, and is amazed and comforted that the ideals of his people are known throughout the world. Even here, the world is a world of tears and the burdens of mortality touch the heart. Dido then arrives at the temple, and is not only beautiful, but shows herself to be a capable leader. Aeneas, still invisible, astonished to see friends, whom he thought had drowned, standing next to Dido. He listens as one of the Trojans describes their past struggles and Aeneas's bravery, declares their peaceful intentions, and asks if they can rebuild their ships at Dido's city. Dido generously offers them land and help in finding Aeneas. Just then, the mist of invisibility breaks away, revealing them, and Venus uses her powers to make Aeneas look extra handsome. Aeneas praises Dido, and she welcomes him and calls for a grand feast. Achates leaves to retrieve gifts for Dido of beautiful clothing and jewels. Venus, still concerned about Juno's wrath and mistrustful of Carthaginian hospitality, sends Cupid, disguised as Aeneas's son Ascanius, to make Dido fall in love with Aeneas. Cupid brings the gifts to the feast, sits in Dido's lap and enchants her, making her forget her beloved Sychaeus as she falls in love with Aeneas. The narrator describes love as poison and fire, and says that Dido is doomed. The Trojans and their hosts drink and make merry together and listen to music. Dido asks Aeneas to tell the whole story of his 7 years of wandering. The Aeneid, Book 2. Aeneas begins to tell the story of his wanderings. Though it's late at night and he's anguished to recall such sad events, he'll do it for Dido. He begins his story during the Trojan War. He describes how the Greeks, who are losing the war, build an enormous wooden horse and hide soldiers inside. The Greeks then sail away from Troy to wait and hide behind a nearby island, leaving the horse behind at Troy, where spirits are high and the gates are open. Some men want to bring in the horse, while others are not sure. Laocoon, a Trojan priest of Neptune, runs up, breathlessly advising the Trojans not to trust the horse, explaining it might be a Greek trick, and saying, "I fear the Greeks, especially bearing gifts." He throws his spear into the horse, and the noise reveals that it's hollow inside. Shepherds bring a young Greek man, Sinon, to the gates. Sinon describes how Ulysses hated him based on false rumors. When the Greeks were going to use him as a human sacrifice, he fled. The Trojans believe Sinon's fraudulent story. Priam unbinds Sinon and asks about the purpose of the horse. Sinon says the horse is an offering to Minerva, whose help the Greeks desperately need. If the horse enters Troy, Sinon says, the Greeks will lose the war. The Trojans, tired of 10 years of war, rejoice at this news. Laocoon slays a bull at the altar. Two monstrous, red-crested sea serpents swim towards the shore. They strangle Laocoon's two sons, then constrict around Laocoon, who fails to dislodge them. The terrified Trojans interpret this as punishment for Laocoon's damaging the horse with his spear, and immediately bring the horse into the city. Though the Trojan seer Cassandra tries to alert the Trojans to their impending doom, the Trojans don't listen to her, celebrating the horse and throwing a big party. During the party, Sinon, hidden by fate, opens the horse, releasing Ulysses and other Greek warriors. Meanwhile, the Greek fleet returns to the Trojan shores. The bloody ghost of Hector, a great, deceased Trojan warrior, appears to Aeneas in a dream and warns Aeneas of a fire and the enemy within the city. Troy cannot be saved, Hector says, and Aeneas should take the household gods and find a new home. Aeneas wakes, hearing screaming and sounds of fighting in the streets. Hector was right. The Greeks are inside and the city burns. On the street, Aeneas meets Panthus, a seer who has given up hope for Troy. Aeneas, in a panic rage about the battle, neglects Hector's advice and joins the fight. A band of Trojans, led by Aeneas, slay a group of Greeks and disguise themselves in the Greeks' armor. They kill many Greeks, but then the Trojans, not recognizing them, fire on them, and many die, including Panthus. The Greeks begin to attack the royal palace, and Aeneas rallies the Trojan troops against them. Aeneas then describes Pyrrhus, the Greek warrior and son of Achilles, and says he was like a snake that hid and grew huge in the winter and now reveals itself. Pyrrhus and his comrades break into the palace, like an overflowing river. In the palace sits Priam, the aged king, who had put on his rusty armor, and bravely attempted to fight even though Hecuba, his wife, begged him to stay with her in safety. Pyrrhus kills Polites, one of Priam's sons. Despite being in mortal danger, Priam rebukes Pyrrhus for killing his son, and, despite his weakness, throws a spear at Pyrrhus. Pyrrhus mercilessly kills Priam, telling him to complain to Achilles in the underworld about his bad behavior. Aeneas, horrified, fears for the safety of his own father, wife, and son. Returning to his house, Aeneas sees Helen, the woman whose beauty started the war. He envies her fortune and longs to vengefully kill her, when Venus appears, reminding Aeneas to focus on his love for his family. She gives him a glimpse of the fight from the gods' perspective, showing how Juno and even Jove are on the Greek side, and encourages him to depart. When Aeneas tells his father Anchises of his plans for them to leave Troy, Anchises firmly responds that he wants to stay in Troy to die, and younger people can flee. Aeneas begs him desperately to reconsider, then arms himself again, refusing to leave his father helpless. Creusa tells Aeneas that she would die with him, but he should protect Ascanius. A harmless, flame-like light illuminates Ascanius's hair. Anchises interprets this as a sign from Jove, which is then further confirmed by a shooting star. Anchises changes his mind, and the family hastens to depart. Aeneas carries Anchises on his back, with Ascanius by his side and Creusa behind. In the confusion of fleeing, Aeneas loses Creusa. Leaving Anchises and Ascanius safely hidden, Aeneas seeks Creusa in the ravaged city, but finds only her ghost. The ghost comforts him, saying that the gods have ordained it all, and that, after years of exile, he will marry a royal in Italy. She tells him not to mourn, and he tries vainly to embrace her. He returns to his father, son, and surviving Trojans. The Aeneid, Book 3. Aeneas continues to tell his story to Dido, as before in first person from his point of view. The Trojans build a fleet, unsure where the fates will lead them. In early summer they set off, bringing the household gods. Aeneas directs the fleet to Thrace, a land friendly to Troy. Aeneas lands and prepares to sacrifice a steer. But when he uproots a plant to shade the altar, the stem bleeds. Frightened, he pulls up another plant, which also bleeds. He prays and pulls up a third plant, which groans and speaks, introducing itself as Polydorus. Polydorus explains that Priam sent him to Thrace so that he would be safe if Troy lost the war. Polydorus also brought gold to secure his protection, but, as Troy fell, the Thracian king killed him and took his gold. The spears that struck Polydorus became the plants Aeneas uprooted. Aeneas gives Polydorus a proper funeral before setting sail again. The Trojans sail to an island, Ortygia, blessed by Apollo, to a city ruled by Aeneas, a friend of Anchises. Aeneas goes to pray for guidance from Apollo. Apollo speaks to him, telling him to find the land of his forefathers and return to his ancient mother, where Aeneas's descendants would rule the world. The men attempt to interpret Apollo's instructions. Anchises believes this ancient homeland to be the nearby island of Crete. After sacrificing animals to Apollo, Neptune, and the winds, the Trojans head off for Crete. But, strangely, they find Crete in the grip of an intense drought, rife with death and disease. Anchises wants to return to Ortygia to consult Apollo again. But that evening, the household gods appear to Aeneas in a dream, and tell him that their homeland is actually the distant Italy. Aeneas recounts this to Anchises, who recalls that Cassandra once said the same thing. The Trojans set sail again, but a storm forces them off course, and they wander for 3 days before landing at the Strophiades Islands, which is the home of the Harpies, monsters with women's faces and filthy bird bodies. The men make a feast with the goats and oxen they find on the island, when the Harpies come screaming down from the hills and destroy their food. The Trojans try to fight back, but fail. Caelano, head Harpy, scolds the men for stealing the Harpies' animals and trying to fight them off their own territory. Then she reveals their future misfortune. They won't manage to establish their city in Italy before they undergo a famine so great they will try to eat their tables. Anchises begs the gods not to bring such trouble to the pious Trojans. The Trojans sail on to Actium, where they enjoy themselves with games and wrestling, happy to have sailed unnoticed past Greek territory. Aeneas leaves a shield he took from a Greek he fought as a symbol that he has been defeated. Winter is coming as they continue to Buthrodum, where Pyrrhus' former kingdom is now under the rule of the Trojan siblings Helenus and Andromache. Andromache, Hector's widow, is so shocked to see Aeneas that at first she thinks he might be a ghost. Andromache explains that she was the slave of Pyrrhus, the evil Greek who killed Priam, until another Greek killed him, after which Helenus inherited some of his territory. She asks after Ascanius, and Helenus leads everyone to the city, which resembles a smaller Troy. Before leaving, Aeneas asks Helenus what the future holds, and how he can avoid Caelano the Harpy's prediction of famine. Helenus describes how to reach Italy, and mentions that Aeneas must first descend to the underworld. When Aeneas finds a white sow and piglets under an oak tree, he will have reached his final destination. The famine will not be a problem, Helenus says, but he counsels Aeneas to avoid certain unfriendly cities and to make sure to avoid the hazardous waters near Charybdis, a whirlpool off the coast of Sicily, and Scylla, a monster that lurks near Charybdis and has the head of a woman and the body of a dolphin or whale. Helenus recommends praying to Juno and visiting the Sibyl of Cumae. Helenus and Andromache give presents to the men, and Aeneas, sorry to depart, thanks them and says that he hopes that his future city will be united with theirs. The Trojans head north and camp briefly, but set off again at night, when Palinurus the navigator can see the constellations by which he guides their route. Soon the Trojans come within sight of Italy, where they see 4 peaceful white horses near the shore, and the men rejoice. They see Mount Etna in the distance, then row furiously to escape the pool of Charybdis. They drift to the island of the Cyclops. When they arrive, a Greek man, Achaemenides, dirty and ragged, begs the Trojans to take him away from the island. He describes the bloodthirsty Cyclops, and how Ulysses blinded him. Achaemenides was left behind when the Greeks departed and survived by hiding. The Trojans take him aboard. As they sail away, the Cyclops hears the splashing and chases them, though they manage to reach deep waters and escape. The winds blow the Trojans towards Scylla and Charybdis, but a fortunate north wind blows them away from danger. They pass many lands. At Drapenum, Sicily, Anchises dies. Aeneas mourns that his father survived such great risks only to die. Aeneas then sadly remarks that neither Helenus nor Caelano warned him of his father's coming death. Finally, Aeneas has finished telling his story, and the Aeneid returns to Dido's court at Carthage. The Aeneid, Book 4, Dido's love for Aeneas, described as a wound and a flame, grows as she listens to Aeneas's sad story. She eventually works up the nerve to speak to her sister Anna, describing her alarm at her passion for Aeneas, and how she had never loved anyone other than Sychaeus. Weeping, she states that she'd rather die than betray Sychaeus' memory. Anna encourages Dido to let herself love. Anna argues that a marriage with Aeneas makes emotional sense since Dido won't waste her youth in loneliness and tactical sense. Since Carthage is surrounded by enemies, including King Iarbas of a nearby nation, whose love Dido had spurned and could use an alliance like this. Anna encourages Dido to keep Aeneas in Carthage by warning him of the dangers of sailing in winter storms. Dido's doubts easily vanish, and she gives herself to passion. Virgil compares poor Dido to a doe who doesn't realize that a hunter's arrow is still stuck in her side. Dido makes sure that Aeneas sees how wealthy she is. Yet, love-struck, she can hardly bring herself to speak with him. She treasures his every word and stays up at night, lingering alone where he sat at dinner. Without her guidance, construction of Carthage comes to a halt. Juno angrily addresses Venus for putting Dido in such a state. Hoping to protect Carthage and block Aeneas's fate, Juno asks to solidify a balanced union by getting Aeneas and Dido to marry. Venus feigns agreement, saying this merger of Carthage and Troy must be fate. Juno explains the wedding plans to Venus. When Aeneas and Dido join a hunting group tomorrow, Juno will create a huge storm. The couple will take refuge in a cave where Juno will marry them. Venus again pretends to agree, but has other secret plans. The following day, the hunting party sets out, including the majestically dressed Dido and Aeneas, who is so handsome he resembles Apollo. The storm arrives, scattering the group, and Aeneas and Dido end up together in a cave, as planned. Juno presides over the wedding, with nature as the witness, while nymphs cry from the hills. Virgil doesn't mention if the couple physically consummates the marriage, but he hints that they do, writing that Dido calls it a marriage, using the word to cloak her sense of guilt. Meanwhile, rumor, the swiftest of all the evils in the world, spreads gossip about Dido and Aeneas's shameful union around the entire region, and about how they've forgotten their leadership roles, shirked their duties, and have spent the whole winter together. Erebus, the nearby king whose love Dido spurned, hears the rumors and, jealous, appeals to his father Jove to intervene. Erebus criticizes Aeneas for becoming like a woman, perfuming himself and letting his men become eunuchs. After checking on the situation in Carthage, Jove sends Mercury to remind Aeneas of his mission. Mercury flies with his winged sandals to Carthage. He finds Aeneas bedecked in sumptuous clothing embroidered by Dido, with an ornamental sword. Mercury asks him why he lingers here, neglecting his own future kingdom. If Aeneas doesn't care to leave, he should at least think of Ascanius, a promising future king and forefather of the Romans. Mercury disappears. Aeneas is so dumbstruck and frightened that his hair stands on end. Aeneas struggles to decide how to break the news of his departure to Dido. He decides to prepare to leave in secret, and figure out how to tell her later. His men are happy to depart. When Dido hears rumors that Aeneas is leaving, she comes to him in a rage, railing against him for planning to leave in secret and for breaking apart their recent marriage, asking if he really must depart during the winter, and begging for his pity. She's disgraced herself, she says, and adds that if he leaves she will end up either married to Erebus or conquered by Pygmalion. She would at least be happier if they'd had a child together, a little Aeneas to keep her company. Aeneas is sorry, but he suppresses his emotions as he remembers Jove's orders. He tells Dido that she should not have thought they were married, as he never discussed being her husband, and they never had a ceremony. If he could have controlled his fate, he says, he would still be in Troy. But since the fates call him to Italy, he must go. He explains that Mercury came to remind him. Aeneas must go, against his will. Dido insults Aeneas, saying that he's not a goddess's son, but was instead born from the earth and nursed by tigers. She describes her misery in a monologue, how she welcomed him as a stranger and split her kingdom with him, only to be spurned. How she won't try to change his decision, but her ghost will haunt him. Dido leaves, fainting, and though Aeneas has many things to say to her, he piously goes to his ships. The Trojans quickly prepare to exit the city, resembling ants that scurry away with a pile of grain. It takes them a day to get ready to leave. Meanwhile, Dido asks Anna to hurry to the shore and ask Aeneas to remain in Carthage until the winter ends and better sailing weather arrives. Anna attempts to convince Aeneas, but the fates and the heavens block Aeneas's ears so that he won't change his mind. Virgil compares Aeneas to a mighty tree, with a crown that reaches the sky, and roots that stretch to the underworld. Dido prays for death. As she prays at her shrine, the water turns black and the wine turns to blood. She interprets these signs as encouraging her suicidal plans, but says nothing to Anna. Night falls, and the Trojans sleep in their ships, planning to leave the next day. Dido endures nightmares about Aeneas. Dido prepares for her death, hiding her intentions from Anna and pretending to be happy. She tells Anna that a priestess recommended ending her heartbreak by burning Aeneas' clothes and armor on a pyre. Anna prepares the pyre, and Dido decorates it and prays throughout the night. Once more, she ponders her future, seeing no escape from her sadness. Even if she went with the Trojans, she'd have been nothing more than their scorned servant, and she'd rather die than try to fight them. During the night, Mercury again appears to Aeneas, telling him to leave quickly before the Carthaginians come to attack their ships. Aeneas wakes his men and the Trojans set sail, leaving the Carthaginian shore. At dawn, Dido sees the ships have sailed away. Crazy with heartbreak, she wishes she'd killed Aeneas when she had the chance. She prays that he will have to fight and watch his people die before founding his city, and asks that he die before reaching old age. She proclaims that her descendants will be the eternal enemies of his. Dido tells her nurse to fetch Anna. Then, while the nurse is away, she climbs the pyre and gives a final speech. She says she's glad to have built a beautiful city and to have avenged her Sichaeus, and wishes that the Trojans had never come. She will die without having gotten revenge on Aeneas, but hopes he's sorry to hear of her death. Finally, she stabs herself. Anna runs to the still dying Dido's side, distraught that Dido had concealed her suicidal plans and gotten Anna to build the pyre under false pretenses. Anna climbs the pyre and holds her dying sister. Juno sends Iris to end Dido's slow torment. Iris offers Dido's body to the underworld and cuts her hair, ending her life. The Aeneid, Book 5. As Aeneas' ships sail from Carthage, he and his men notice a bright point in the city, but don't realize that it's Dido's burning pyre. A storm rises, and the navigator Palinurus advises landing. Aeneas knows of a friendly land nearby in Sicily, ruled by Aeneas. They land and Aeneas greets them. Then Aeneas proposes a festival and various games: boat race, foot race, boxing, shooting, to celebrate the memory of Anchises, who died exactly a year ago and was buried here. The men put on garlands and make offerings at Anchises' grave. A serpent in 7 coils winds around the grave, but harms no one, a good sign. Aeneas sacrifices 6 animals. The first day of the games dawns brightly. A crowd of locals gathers to watch, for boats attempt the first race. The large boats and brave captains, dressed in purple and gold, are described. Geus leads at first, but his navigator, Menoetes, fears the reefs near the cliffs and directs the boat to deeper waters, and Clonthus gains the lead. Geus angrily throws Menoetes overboard. The crowd laughs at Menoetes as he climbs onto a rock to dry. Another captain, Sergestus, takes the lead. Nesthers tails him, encouraging his crew to draw strength from memories of Troy, but also acknowledging that Neptune will decide the victor. Sergestus's boat crashes on the rocks, and Nesthers surges forward. Clonthus prays to Neptune, promising to make offerings to him, and comes from behind to win. At the end of the race, Aeneas gives all the captains gifts. Sergestus is the last to return, embarrassed by his crash. Aeneas happily welcomes him back and gives him the special gift of a slave woman with 2 sons. The Trojans and locals prepare for the foot race. Nisus and Euryalus, 2 great Trojan friends, join the race, as well as 5 others. Before they start, Aeneas reminds them that they'll all get a prize. Nisus slips and knows he can't win, but he gets up and tackles the leading runner, Salius, to help Euryalus' chances. Euryalus wins, but Salius is angry about the cheating. Aeneas decides that the race results will stand, but comforts Salius with a prize. The boxing match is next. Dares, a muscular hero of the Trojan War, steps into the ring, and no one wants to fight him. Aeneas, king of the region, goads his friend Entellus to fight. Entellus, a former champion, protests that he's too old and that he doesn't care about glory, but he gets up anyway. The spectators admire his enormous strength. During the fight, despite Entellus's slowness and age, Dares resembles a soldier attempting to attack a mountain fortress. Entellus tries to hit Dares, but Dares slips away, and Entellus falls. When he gets back up, he pounds Dares so relentlessly that Aeneas stops him. Entellus, the winner, sacrifices a bull just by punching it with his boxing glove, and announces his retirement from boxing. Next is the shooting contest, with bows and arrows. The men shoot well, and a man named Eurytion seems to have won, since he manages to shoot the targeted bird. Aeneas shoots last, and his arrow catches fire in the dare. Aeneas interprets this as a sign from Jove, and gives Aeneas the first prize, Anchises' decorated bull. Eurytion is kind and doesn't mind his unexpected drop to second place. Ascanius and other Trojans parade in on their horses and perform a highly choreographed horse show that simulates a battle. Juno watches these celebrations from the heavens and sends down Iris to investigate. Iris finds the Trojan women apart from the games, exhausted with sailing and weeping about not yet having a home. Juno disguises herself as an old Trojan woman and comes to the Trojan women to stir up trouble. She complains about the 7 years of traveling, wishes the Trojan ships would go up in flames, and exclaims that Cassandra, in a dream, told her that Aeneas' land the Trojans' destined home. Finally, she throws a torch at the Trojan ships. One Trojan woman, Pyrgo, warns that the fire-starter, it's who she says she is, and looks more like a god. After a moment of indecision, the women's longing for home overtakes them, and they start heaping the ships with flammable material. A messenger rushes into Ascanius with the news that the women have begun burning the ships. Ascanius stops the celebrations and reaches the women first, bringing them to their senses. As Aeneas and others arrive, the embarrassed women leave the scene, shaking off Juno's influence. But the boats continue to burn. Aeneas prays to Jove to either stop the fire or to kill him now with lightning. A huge rainstorm rolls in, and all but 4 of the ships are saved. Aeneas forgets his fate and can't decide if it would be better to keep going to Italy or to remain here, as he now sees his people wish to do. The wise old seer Knots suggests a plan: the tired and weak should stay here in Aeneas' lands, while the fit can continue. Aeneas still, inshore, until Anchises' ghost appears to him at night. Anchises tells Aeneas to follow Knots' plan, and to bring only the best for the future difficulties in Italy. But before heading for Italy, Anchises says Aeneas should go to visit him in the underworld, with the aid of the Sibyl of Cumae. Anchises vanishes, and Aeneas calls after him, asking why he must go so quickly. The next day, the Trojans decide who will stay and who will go. For those who will stay, Aeneas marks out the boundaries of the new town, while Aeneas describes the laws. They also mark out a temple for Venus and a priest to look after Anchises' grave. The reduced group of Trojans set sail. Venus goes to Neptune and describes Juno's recent plot, then asks Neptune to grant the Trojans safe passage to Italy. Neptune agrees, but requires the sacrifice of one man. Palinurus, the skilled navigator, leads the Trojan fleet. At night, the god of sleep comes to Palinurus and forces him to doze off. Palinurus falls overboard and calls for help, but no one hears. Eventually, Aeneas takes over steering, and grieves for his friend, but blames him for putting too much trust in the quiet sea. The Aeneid, Book 6. Aeneas and the Trojans arrive at Cumae, while his men go hunting and exploring. Aeneas climbs to Apollo's temple and the Sibyl's cave. Long ago, Daedalus flew here using the wings he constructed and built this temple for Apollo. The doors to the temple depict the story of the Minotaur, who Daedalus helped to outwit. But Daedalus was too sad to depict the story of Icarus, his fallen son, on the doors. The Sibyl urges Aeneas and Achates to sacrifice animals to Apollo. They do, and she calls out, her voice echoing through 100 doors. She sees Apollo and enters a trance, possessed by the god. Aeneas asks to hear his fate, promising to build Apollo a temple and honor him as guardian of his future kingdom. As Helenus had counseled, Aeneas asks the Sibyl not to write the prophecy on easily scattered leaves, but to say it aloud. The violently possessed Sibyl answers as the 100 doors fly open. The Trojans will reach and rule in Italy, but must first fight a terrible war. Aeneas asks how he can descend to the underworld to see Anchises again. The Sibyl answers that it's easy to go down to hell, but difficult to come back up. To visit the ghosts, he must find a nearby tree with a golden bough, which he must present as a gift to Proserpina, queen of the underworld. Only those fated to go to the underworld can remove the bough. But before all that, he should bury the body of his friend that has washed up on the shore. Having located the body of their countryman Maecenas on the shore, the Trojans build a tomb for him. Aeneas prays to find the tree with the golden bough, and Venus sends 2 doves to help him. He finds the tree near the entrance to the underworld, and successfully removes the bough. The Trojans bury Maecenas. Then Aeneas performs sacrifices for good luck in the underworld. The Sibyl leads Aeneas to the underworld's entrance. Monsters and embodiments of hunger, war, and discord among many others stand before the entrance. Aeneas wants to fight them with his sword, but the Sibyl tells him that the sword will have no effect on their ghostly forms. Heading deeper into the underworld, they reach Charon, who will ferry them across the river Styx. The shores of the river are crowded with the ghosts of those who were not properly buried and therefore must wait 100 years before crossing the river. Aeneas sees the ghost of Palinurus among those who are waiting. Aeneas says that Palinurus shouldn't have died, since a prophecy predicted that he'd reach Italy. In fact, Palinurus explains that after falling from the ship he did float to Italy, only to be killed by locals. He asks for a proper burial, or for Aeneas to help him cross the river. The Sibyl tells him not to cheat his fate by trying to get across the river before he is destined to, but comforts him by saying that he will be long remembered on earth. Charon tells Aeneas he cannot take a living person across the river, but the Sibyl displays the golden bough, and Charon ceases his objections. After crossing, the Sibyl subdues the 3-headed guard dog Cerberus with drugged cake. After passing Cerberus, Aeneas and Sibyl encounter a variety of dead people, who are being categorized babies, suicides, those who died for love, etc., or, for particularly bad people, judged for punishment. Among the dead for love group wanders Dido. Aeneas tells her he left her unwillingly, begging her to stay, but she angrily ignores him, and runs to Sychaeus, who meets her love with love. The fascinated ghosts crowd around Aeneas except for the fallen Greeks, who are frightened of him and avoid him. Aeneas speaks with the disfigured Deiphobus, son of Priam, who describes how his wife betrayed him to the Greeks. Aeneas and the Sibyl pass the section of the underworld devoted to tormenting the guilty souls, noting diverse methods including whips and a liver-eating vulture. Aeneas leaves the golden bough at the gate to the happy part of the underworld, the Elysian fields. He and the Sibyl cross into the beautiful meadows, where the shades enjoy music, dancing, and athletic contests. They see Trojan ancestors and great poets. Aeneas asks one Trojan where he can find Anchises, and the Trojan points them to a ridge where their lines have a better view of the Elysian fields. When they find Anchises, he joyously greets Aeneas. Aeneas explains that he came specifically to see Anchises, and tries 3 times to hug Anchises, but each time the ghost fades away. Aeneas then notices the souls crowded near a river. Anchises explains that those souls have passed 1,000 years in the underworld, and, finally cleaned of their mortal past, they are preparing to re-enter the world in new bodies. He points out Aeneas's descendants, who will be great kings in Italy, and eventually in Rome. Anchises describes Rome's 7 hills, and how it will be blessed above all cities and will rule the world. He identifies Augustus Caesar, who will preside over a golden age, and describes the greatness of other Roman heroes who will live during Augustus's rule. He then describes the great defining characteristic of Rome. These will be your arts, to put your stamp on the works and ways of peace, to spare the defeated, break the proud in war. Aeneas asks about a particularly beautiful soul, but Anchises mourns that this soul, Marcellus, a promising nephew of Augustus, will only live a short time on earth. The time comes for Aeneas to leave the underworld. There are two exits to the underworld. One is the gate of horn for true shades, and the other is the gate of ivory for false dreams. Anchises escorts Aeneas and the Sibyl to leave through the gate of false dreams.